It's the I Can't Mom Today podcast with Heather, the new mom, and Vera, the seasoned mom. I Can't Mom Today.
Hey, this is Vera and Heather back again with another episode of I Can't Mom Today podcast. Hi, Vera.
Hello, Heather. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm on vacation. I mean, in the hot spot of Oklahoma.
Woo, fancy.
Literally hot. It's so hot.
Is it really?
Yes. It's like almost 100.
Oh my gosh. But it's dry heat. That's not like.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
It's not dry heat.
No.
I always think of Oklahoma and like tumbleweeds and stuff.
No, it does have a breeze, at least in Florida.
Yeah.
Well, Tallahassee does not.
Yeah, Tallahassee, the air doesn't move.
No. So yeah, I'm here and recording in the extra bedroom at my mother-in-law's house, and
again, fancy.
Yeah, with
Very fancy.
My luggage and underwear and dirty clothes everywhere.
That's funny. That's like me and Jerry when we went to Cape Cod, which our friends were amazing to host us, and we stayed with them. And that was literally, it was just like the spare bedroom / office, and the bed, is like a trundle bed, so it took up basically the whole room. Mm-hmm. And so we had to like shove our suitcase. And I'm not complaining, Michelle, if you're listening, I'm not complaining because it was wonderful and they were wonderful hosts and everything. But like you said, yeah, it's like you're just got your underwear and everything's hanging out all over the place. You're just like, whatever. Yep. But it's still nice to be out of town and get a little bit of a break, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Is Baker having fun?
He is having so much fun. He thinks that, he just loves OU, and which I knew that was going to be a thing, but it's definitely been concreted into his mind. They play football outside every day, and it's OU against the Tigers, obviously, because LSU. So I'm the Go Tigers, and they're OU. So everybody's against me.
Aww.
It's fine. Whatever. We beat them last time, so whatever.
Sweet.
Yeah. So we have a very special guest today. It's Dr. Heather. And I didn't get a doctorate. It's not me. It's Dr. Heather Rhodes. And I'm going to let Dr. Heather introduce herself because she has some pretty impressive stuff going on.
Oh,
hey,
Dr.
Heather.
So sweet. Hi, guys. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
Yay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So I am a clinical pharmacist by training and education, and then took a next step into the holistic world through a school of natural medicine, became a certified holistic health practitioner. So I call myself a holistic pharmacist. And I just support women in understanding their bodies and how specifically their hormones can put them closer to their health goals. I find that health can be really complicated and confusing, and women can get stuck pretty easily most of the time because we aren't taught the things we need to know about our bodies and our hormones to understand how to work with them. And so I really try to focus on simplifying as much as possible and making sure we have the tools, the education, the knowledge around working with our bodies, so that we can show up the way we want to show up.
So it's not just like throw some tampons and Midol at you.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
It's so true. I mean, that's really sincerely. I mean, that's why we were excited to have you on because, as a lot of our listeners know, Heather struggles with PCOS. Mm-hmm. And I am the more mature one of the two of us, and myself and some of my friends are starting to go through, pre-menopause or whatever, we're starting to get that point in our lives, and how misunderstood that is. And, testosterone levels, even I was just talking to a friend of mine. We'll get into it, but yeah. So it's not just your period or your, it's also, postpartum, perimenopausal, we've got all kinds of stuff going on throughout our lives, no matter what point you're at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I really believe that, when we go through our education on technically now it's like sex ed, right? Like you just go to a classroom with your whole class and they separate the boys and girls and they tell you like, here's a tampon, here's how to not get pregnant. Don't do it. And that's kind of it. And I think that even the understanding of like, hey, this is what your period actually means. And this is what's happening to your body during that time. And this is what's happening to your energy and your metabolism. And, you have a period every single month for the entirety really of like, let me not say entirety, for the majority of your life. And to not understand, why or how that influences every single day is so crazy to me. And I don't think that, I don't really blame anybody because I don't think our mom, like the generation above us, or even 2 generations above us, even were taught the things we know now about our bodies and how they work and hormones and all of that. But what I see happen is that we just kind of follow these traditional like paths and, think that all the issues we have as women are super isolated. Like, oh, I have anxiety. That must be related only to anxiety. Or I have, mood swings. That must be something going on with my brain and only my mood. And what we see when we bring this holistic picture into play is like, hey, no, your body is doing something every single day that aligns with this cycle you have every single month. And so if we really focus in and learn, what is it doing? Why is this part of its core design and function? And how do we work with it? We start to see that a lot of our issues are interconnected and a lot of things are simply our body's response to the signals we give it. So I wish, that as teenagers, we learn like, hey, yeah, you get a period every month and this is how that happens. And this is why that happens. And these are the days you can actually get pregnant. And this is how you know that. Versus like, here's a tampon, good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Have fun.
Yeah.
It's
and
like
by the way,
when you go like it's like a luteal phase and there's like all kinds of different things and like you're more productive during these days. I mean, I've done a little bit of research. Obviously, I'm nowhere near an expert, but it's bananas because it is really like it's something first of all that a lot of women are ashamed of because a lot of we're taught to be quiet about it and it's not, like don't talk about your period and like,
don't let it affect you. It shows weakness.
Possible. Yeah.
It shows weakness if you show that it's affecting you. Like I know I've been lucky in that my cycle has always been very regular. I mean, it's like 28 days on the nose and
except for when there was a point
except for when I got pregnant and that's how I knew fairly early. But also too when I have rheumatoid arthritis and when I started taking I was originally they started giving me Plaquenil, with the hydro whatever, the drug that they thought was going to cure coronavirus, which it didn't, obviously. So I started taking that and it I swear, and I looked online and it said, oh no, that's not a side effect. It messed with my periods terribly. I was getting 2 periods a month. And they were super heavy and crazy. And finally, and I went to see an acupuncturist who has a more holistic view of, you can believe what you want, but I think she's amazing. And, she said, I think that you're premenopausal and you're, and she's like, your hormones are messed up, your heart, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on with you, in addition to the RA. And I said, yeah, well, that's funny you say that because my period's gotten all weird and they put me on this one drug and it's not helping. I eventually went off of it because it didn't do anything for me either for the RA. And now since going to her and also I made some diet changes and whatever, I'm back to, 28 days. Everything's fine. I can tell you, I know when it's coming. I know 10 days before I start craving chocolate. I know, like it's just been like that way since I was 14 years old. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on that and what, you started touching on that about how your body's doing different things every day. And that's one of the things that affect us women as women, what your thoughts are on the whole cycle. Like, can you give us an overview? I guess of some sort.
Yeah. So like an overview of like your cycle in general, like what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, our body works towards getting us pregnant. So if you think about our core design and function, the very first thing your body is focused on day in and day out, its top priority is keeping your heart beating, right? So we are very much designed as self-preservation at our chorus level. That's our instinct. That's our like natural kind of wiring and design, is we've got to keep ourselves safe no matter what. So the hormones that do that are your stress hormones. So we have things like adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, those types of things. Your body's second goal, the very second thing it wants to do as a female, is conceive. It wants you to get pregnant. It wants to reproduce. Again, that is that like core design. So even if you don't want to, your body's always trying to do that from the time you get your first cycle. Yeah, right? From the time you get your first cycle until your body gets to a certain age where it's like, hey, I don't think we could do this anymore. So the cool thing is that your body's also very self-regulatory, meaning that if it thinks like, hey, there's not enough nutrients in this environment, there's not enough safety in this environment, if we got pregnant right now, that would be detrimental to us being able to stay alive. It will actually shut down and turn off those female hormones. So that's a really key important piece to remember. But essentially, in how it's all working is your body works to ovulate every single month to drop an egg, because it says if we drop an egg every month, we have the chance to get pregnant every month. And so that's your ovulation. And that's kind of the big kicker, because a lot of us think when we think of our period or our cycle, oh, well, when we're actually bleeding is what we're tracking. It's what we're working towards. It's what we're looking at. And it's actually quite the opposite, because you don't have an actual period if you are not actually ovulating. So when someone's on birth control, yeah, they're bleeding or they experience a bleed every month, but it's not truly what we would call a period, because it's not really the shedding of the lining. It's actually your body's response to having a dip in hormone levels because you start taking sugar pills. So essentially, we kind of go through our 4 phases. You have your ovulation phase, which is where your body drops the egg and says, hey, let's do this thing and get you pregnant. The egg then, dissolves in a couple of days, and the shell that it was in is called your corpus luteum. And that actually becomes your uterus lining. And that's your luteal phase, like Heather mentioned earlier. And that's the time from when you ovulate till your period starts. So your body just prepares the environment. It gets ready for there to be a nice little baby in there if the egg is, fertilized and attached. After around what should be like 12 to 18 days, your hormones will naturally dip and your body says, oh, okay, we don't have a baby in here, so let's get rid of this lining. We don't need it. And so that's when your period comes. Your period lasts for around most people 4 to 7-ish days. And then your body spends around 10 to 14 days getting ready to drop another egg. So it gets that egg ready. It starts saying like, okay, little eggs, like, hey guys, let's get ready. And it starts kind of building them up. And then eventually one will get bigger than the others. And it's like, perfect, you're the winner. Go ahead and drop. And then we're back at ovulation again.
I love that. I'm like, I've got all these little visuals in my head, like,
right?
All right, you're the biggest egg. Go. Woo. Okay.
Yeah. And that's exactly how it works.
And then your little uterus is like this nice little nest. Okay, let's hang out. Decorating the apartment. And
I think it's nice to think of it like that, because sometimes our periods come with like what feels like the depths of hell for some people. We think of them as like so annoying and so frustrating, like, oh my gosh, my body's trying to kill me. But actually, when you think about it in this other way, it's like, no, like your body's really trying to help you and support you and make sure this little baby has everything it needs. And it very much is in line and in tune with the like mothering, creative, intuitive aspects and characteristics that we have as women that males don't have. Well, I won't say they don't have, but it's not their primary driver.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. It's not their primary thing.
Yeah.
So how can, just being selfish here, how can, relating with PCOS, like how do women know what's going on in their body? Because I know that there are different types where there's like either, gosh, I'm trying to think. It's like insulin resistance. There is, I don't know, some other things too.
Yeah, I'll talk about them. That's such a good question. So PCOS is really a disorder with ovulation. So it means for some reason or another, your body isn't ovulating on time, quote unquote. So most cycles are like 28 to 32 days. That means that your body's following the standard timeline of taking around 10-ish days to get an egg ready. Then the egg drops. And then we have that like 12, 14, 16 days of getting the nest ready, right? So when you have PCOS, typically what we see happen is you don't ovulate at that. Not everybody ovulates at 14 days, but you don't ovulate in a normal time frame. Sometimes women with PCOS don't ovulate for like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on, how severe your PCOS and PCOS symptoms are. And so the reason for that we see most often is when everybody should be getting the little eggies ready, and one of them should be like kind of pushing its way forward as the star of the show and getting the biggest. What we see in PCOS is that there, for one reason or another, a lot of eggs get ready, but no one ever takes the lead. They actually never you don't ever have 1, 2, 3, or 4. Sometimes you have 3 or 4 eggs that get to be much bigger and ready to drop. But in PCOS, we see that you may have like 20 eggs that are all just kind of stuck at this same level. They're not ever getting that signal, that sign which is a hormone that comes in and tells, hey, you guys get ready. You're going to be the ones to drop. That doesn't happen. And so when we think about what's going on there, sometimes it's the presence of high testosterone in the ovaries. Sometimes it's the presence of too much insulin in the ovaries. And then sometimes it's an issue with the communication between your brain, your thyroid, and your ovaries. So keeping all of that in mind, when we think about the 4 types of PCOS, we have adrenal-based PCOS, which just means that your adrenals, your adrenaline, your stress system is calling the shots. And basically what we see there is your body kind of says, hey, we need to stay alive. And we've been making a ton of these stress hormones lately. So we don't have any extra resources to go towards providing for a baby if we were to conceive. So let's kind of shut this process down. Let's tell the eggs to calm down. Let's put a pause on the whole show. So that's kind of the adrenal-based PCOS. And then we have an inflammation-based PCOS, which is where there's just a lot of stress, a lot of inflammation that your body's responding to. And sometimes it even feels or looks like an immune response. So this is how people with autoimmune diseases or autoimmune conditions or certain genetic disorders, we see linked more closely to PCOS. So we see sometimes that women with, autoimmune issues have a higher incidence of also having PCOS. And that's kind of what's going on there. We also have the insulin resistant type PCOS. And what that means is your body is making a lot of insulin and it's not getting utilized correctly. And so that can be something where either you're having a lot of sugar, or it can be something where your blood sugar is just not staying stable. So sometimes your blood sugar is super low and your body tries to respond by dumping all the sugar from your liver, and then it gets super high. And then insulin just gets like shuffled in the mix, almost like a tidal wave. And so you end up with these high levels of insulin that's not able to do its job. And we know that there's a lot of insulin and glucose, like sugar regulation in the ovaries, because they have to be fueling the little eggies all the time. And so when you have a lot of that, it can kind of stall things out. And again, those multiple eggs get stopped at the same point. And then we have post-birth control PCOS, which birth control's job is to shut down ovulation. It's to tell your body to stop making your own female-based hormones, and you become dependent on the synthetic hormones that you're given. And so when we see like post-pill PCOS, what it means is your body hasn't kind of regenerated its own system. It hasn't turned on the machine and started things up again to get ovulation rolling. It's interesting because a lot of people will say, oh, well, you have one type of PCOS or the other, or you need to know your PCOS type in order to have an appropriate treatment. And what I find, what a lot of people, are advocating for and researching is like, hey, PCOS is looking more like a spectrum, which means that you may not necessarily have just adrenal-based PCOS. If your adrenals are high, chances are you've got some insulin resistance, and we know that insulin resistance can cause inflammation. So you could kind of have this overlapping of multiple factors. And it's just kind of like, where on the spectrum are you falling? Are you falling as someone that has more insulin resistance? Are you falling as someone that has more inflammation? But you may still have a couple of these other things playing a role. And then we also see that sometimes women have a lot of PCOS symptoms, but they haven't progressed enough to shut down ovulation, or to cause these like really long periods. Maybe they only have like 36, 37-day periods, which would still kind of fall close to that normal range, but they have a lot of the symptoms of PCOS. And that's kind of another issue where I look at the spectrum of like, hey, that means your body might be headed this way. And we can kind of come in and bring some support and some interventions to shift it closer the other way, instead of just waiting for you to get all the way there and then get the official diagnosis.
That you answered one of my questions. I was like, what, could you have all or most of these? Cause I feel like I do have some,
well, she mentioned sugar in there, Heather.
What are you talking about?
Heather is a sugarholic.
I don't have any problems.
Well, that's an issue with insulin, right? So when you have a lot of insulin, I think it gets like kind of a bad rap because a lot of people just think about it in terms of diabetes. But insulin's job is actually a like growth and fat storage hormone. So its job is to activate your craving center and say like, hey, we're here. We need to start storing some energy and some fat cells. Can you give us some energy? And what does your body think is energy? Sugar. It's like the fastest, quickest, most bioavailable form of energy.
See, it's not me, it's my hormones.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I've tried to, because mine's out of control. I just cannot, like, I'm not so much the periods, but like just waking and like, I just cannot drop weight. And I did some research where it was like saying, because your body is in such stress all the time that you shouldn't be doing like, CrossFit or long bike, like anything long. You should be like doing like slow weighted workouts and
like Pilates and yoga. And so I have the same, I have the same thing. And I had to start doing that. I used to love to run. And again, my acupuncturist, she's, don't ever do that. Your body's not made for running. Stop it. Go do yoga. And I was like, yoga. But I have to admit, I love yoga and I love Pilates now, but it was definitely a transition. And like Heather said, Dr. Heather, maybe you can validate what Heather is saying is that, is that the case? Because it will create like more stress. Like if Heather goes and does CrossFit, she's burning a bunch of calories, but then she's kind of like pumping up the adrenaline at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a CrossFit coach and an ex-marathon runner, so I relate to both of you. So essentially, it's all, again, like thinking about the signals you're giving your body. So we live in bodies that are super like our body's core design and function, the way it works is the same as it worked when people were living in caves, right? Like not much. I mean, we've changed and we've evolved, but for the most part, our general functionality has been the same. And so when you think about that, when you wake up and run every morning, you're doing it for fun and enjoyment and to get a hit of endorphins. Your body is like, holy crap, she was asleep. She woke up because this thing was chasing her. And like, we've got to pump all the adrenaline. We've got to keep our heart beating. Like we didn't even have time to get food. Like, I mean, it's almost like I think a lot of times as my body is like my toddler and I'm like, okay, how would like my toddler interpret what I'm doing right now? And it would be like, oh my gosh, like what is happening to mom? Why is she doing that? Your body's really similar to that. And so what happens is when you send your body a signal that says, hey, I need you to make more stress hormones. I need you to get the adrenaline ready. Then it does that. And that goes back to that core design and function. When it starts prioritizing making stress hormones over everything else, it changes the way you break down food. It changes the way you store energy. And at first, things look great, right? Because you burn some extra energy. Your body's like, oh my gosh, we need to get ready and like burn all this fat up. But then over time, especially if we aren't replenishing and sending other signals that say, hey, you're safe. You don't need to only make stress hormones. We're not actually running from a bear. We have time to eat and to, be in vulnerable positions, which is why yoga is so helpful in lowering cortisol and stress levels. Then your body starts realizing, all right, let's change everything up. We're in high stress mode. We're in survival mode. We need to be in self-conservation mode. That slows down your metabolism. That changes your thyroid function. And it basically increases your insulin and every other hormone your body uses to store fat, because your body's like, we're in literally a famine or a dangerous situation, and having more fat will actually keep us alive. And your body's going to prioritize that over anything else. So we really look at how do we change that signal your body's getting? So if you love CrossFit, that's cool. You can love CrossFit. Just know, hey, this is adding to that stress hormone bucket. So if you already have a really stressful job, a really stressful life, you're on social media all the time, you're on your phone all the time, like you're listening to podcasts every second you get, and then we're adding CrossFit on top of it, and we're not doing any stretching, we're not doing deep breathing, we're not eating enough. Your body just says like, all right, let me go into this preservation mode. And the only thing I'll do and focus on is storing more energy because we're having more leave than we have coming in.
That makes so much sense. And again, it kind of falls in line with kind of what my acupuncturist said. And I'll admit too, like since I started, I was like, okay, I'll do yoga. I feel like I noticed a difference, you know, and or Pilates. I try and take a Pilates class every couple of days a week. And it, you know, and there's lots of, like you said, like lots of stretching and breathing. And, you know, when I first started, I was like, this is BS, but I'm not really working out right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And those things, actually, the reason they lower cortisol and lower stress signals is because number one, you're slowing down and your heart rate isn't, you know, going through the roof, but you're still doing like muscular engagement. So that helps your muscles start sucking up any extra insulin you've got there, which is good. We want that to happen. But you also are putting yourself in like vulnerable positions. Like think about yoga poses, like child's pose and boat. I mean, all of these things basically make your most important organs open and like kind of exposed. And your body's believing, oh, if she was in a dangerous situation, if there was a bear chasing her, if she was in the middle of a famine, she wouldn't slow down and take the time to do all of this stuff. So you actually activate your rest and digest nervous system by doing mind and body connective movements where you're focusing on breathing, you're slowing down, you're doing different positions. And that actually sends a signal to your body to lower stress hormones. So that's how you get that double whammy of, hey, you're still improving insulin response and you're still improving your body's hormone regulation, but you're also helping to improve digestion and lower cortisol and shift your nutrients from being stored as fat to being used for energy because your body starts believing, hey, she's not going to burn out our energy stores all at once. She's just going to take a little bit and then give us more. And then she'll take a little bit and she'll give us more. It's very much a like trust situation. Your body's trying to figure out what does she do? And can we trust that she's going to continue giving us what we need? Or is she going to keep running us into the ground?
Wow, I love that. Well, and when we've talked about that, Heather, when we've talked about this in the past, I think that you've mentioned some of your research about like certain things that you should and shouldn't eat and all that, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's
obviously sugar. I mean, but sugar's not great. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. Gluten. It was saying like, they're saying like gluten is kind of for a lot of PCOS people, it winds up, you know, putting your body in a higher stress situation, and also dairy.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And when we look at studies and clinical studies, there really hasn't been a super clear consensus of like, yes, that's definitely the case. I've had clients and other coaches that have said like, yeah, I've found this to be really helpful. It's not something I advocate for just because it's really hard to be both gluten and dairy free. And I want someone to focus on how can you eat in a way that will support your body for like the entirety of your life, what is super sustainable and practical for you. And for some people that truly does involve, you know, removing gluten and dairy. And for other people, we see just as effective responses and results without having to do that. And so I kind of feel like, why would we stress you out in following this super restrictive diet if we don't even have super clear evidence that shows us like, oh yeah, this will change everything. Two things I'll say about each of those is that number one, gluten, the issue most people have with gluten is that it looks like thyroid molecules. So if you took a gluten molecule and your thyroid hormone and put them beside each other, they'd be like almost like twins. And so what happens is if you have poor gut health or leaky gut and your body's breaking down gluten and some of it goes through your gut lining, your gut wall, then your body may find it and say like, oh, this is a thyroid hormone. We should like attack it and then remember what it looks like so that essentially like it's not coming out anymore. And so your body does that for gluten. And then the next time it sees something that looks like gluten, it attacks it and puts it away, but it's actually your thyroid hormone. So that's how a lot of people end up with like Hashimoto's and some autoimmune conditions related to gluten.
Interesting.
Totally.
Yeah. And then dairy, usually what we see with most commercialized dairy products is that they are a little bit more inflammatory because they, most of the time, if they're processed and you're using like non-organic and just kind of like standard, like I think about, I have an interesting relationship with dairy. I thought I was intolerant to it because it would break me out, but actually what breaks me out is like the really cheap, like Borden and Daisy and like those mass produced items that typically involve taking out the actual lactose and the actual proteins. Anytime something is pasteurized, we're taking out pieces of things that help us break it down. So if you were to try something like an organic grass-fed type of dairy that still has all the fat in it, it usually can be better tolerated. But dairy is also one of those that like we know, it can cause inflammation for sure. So if you're someone that has a ton of inflammation, you may notice a lot of benefits from pulling dairy out. But if you're someone that has more like insulin resistance or adrenal based issues, pulling out dairy and gluten may not be a huge kicker for you. And so to put kind of this like across the board statement, like a lot of PCOS like influencers and, you know, coaches I've seen happen before, it can sometimes be a little misleading and make people feel like, okay, well, until I can do this, I'm not going to be able to fix my PCOS. And that's not exactly true. And there was one more thing. Oh, Vera mentioned like obviously pulling out sugar. And I wanted to hit on this super quick because a lot of us think that in order to stabilize our blood sugar, we need to get rid of sugar or eat less carbs or eat better carbs or whatever it may be. And we're seeing two issues there. One being that like your body needs sugar, and actually having sugar and having carbs, but pairing them in the right way to keep your blood sugar stable helps you to tolerate sugar better, because it's really hard to be able to pull out sugar your whole life, right?
Yeah.
And so what we see is like keto, low carb, intermittent fasting, we basically deprive our body of glucose and sugar, which increases our insulin response. And then we have them later on in life or, you know, at a birthday party, or we, you know, quote unquote, fall off the wagon. And then we have these crazy exaggerated responses and our insulin resistance never gets better. And so one thing we've seen is number one, helping people tolerate sugar and carbs better. And then number two is removing what we call polyunsaturated fatty acids. So these are really like unstable forms of fats that can kind of jack up our body's signaling molecules. And one of the biggest things I say, like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, that's super chemically. I tell people like, okay, let's just try to pull out the processed vegetable oils. So things like canola oil and palm oils, soybean oil, processed food, fast food, restaurant food, etc. If you have less of that, we see that your body starts responding to insulin so much better. And so a lot of us think like, okay, well, we need to pull out sugar. And I say like, let's actually focus on pulling out some of these unstable molecules that will disrupt how your body talks to all the different pieces and see what that does for your insulin response. And usually we see a much greater impact than just trying to have someone restrict sugar.
See, that's fascinating. Well, because, you know, again, when in the beginning of my RA journey, which, you know, I hate the term journey, but there's no really any better way to put it. You know, I gave up gluten and aspartame. I love Diet Coke. And so I gave that up. And I noticed a difference within even just like a week. I felt like I started to feel a little bit better. But when in the process of giving, and then I gave up soy too, which basically is giving up soybean oil, which half of our, you know, everything's fried in, you know, or whatever. But I just did that based on some research, but it didn't connect what you just said with the polyunsaturated fats. So when you give all that stuff up, you basically have to give up most fast food and a lot of restaurant food, unless you order something basic, like you order, you know, you eat clean, you know, like you just order a piece of grilled meat with some steamed vegetables and, you know, maybe a potato or whatever, you know, it's just basic food. It doesn't have a bunch of sauces and it's not fried in that horrible oil or whatever. And I started losing, I feel like my body just kind of went, oh, okay. And just kind of deflated. you know, and I
Yeah.
ate tons of carbs too. I ate rice, but then since I had to be gluten free, I ate, brown rice pasta. So, which is basically just ground up brown rice and water. And it totally changed everything and helped my inflammation as well. So that's why I bring all this up, because it's interesting what you were saying about the connection maybe was partly the gluten, and of course aspartame is terrible for you. But that change in my diet just really helped my inflammation and helped and my weight. Like it just was like, whoa, I'm losing weight. What?
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the artificial sugars and sweeteners, because a lot of times when we decide like, okay, I'm going to cut out all sugar, we bring in products like, I think of like Oikos 000 yogurt that's like no sugar, no carbs, no fat. So then I'm like, well, what are you actually eating? But aside from that, a lot of times we see that these artificial sugar substitutes, sugar alcohols, they still give your body an insulin response. So now your body it still releases insulin, but there's no sugar for the insulin to actually do anything with. So it actually further increases insulin resistance. And so that's where things can get really tricky, because you're thinking like, well, I'm not having sugar, so I'm helping my insulin. But when you have that fake sugar, or you have, like essentially these foods that don't have any substance to them, your body can't actually break up, then your body's releasing insulin because you're eating. Every time you eat, your body releases insulin, but the insulin's just hanging out and it has nowhere to go, because it's like, well, we don't have any sugar to work on, to take to the muscles. So we're just going to sit here for a little bit. And that's the problem you're trying to avoid in the first place. And so that can be really confusing, because I did a residency in diabetes management. And even in that, we were taught dietitians were taught, like everybody was saying like, well, just don't eat as much sugar, just eat low calorie, low carb, low fat, like sugar-free, sodas if you're going to have them. And really all that was doing was pushing their body further into that insulin issue.
I just want to like spend like 6 weeks with you.
I know, seriously, this is so fascinating. I mean, it's really, it just makes so much sense. It makes sense.
Now, because we don't want to bring this too long, we'd love to have you back because I feel like there's so much that in your brain that like is going to help our audience. Is there some takeaways that like something that they can advocate for? Because the medical system is really difficult in our country, as I'm sure you're aware. And a lot of insurances don't pay for certain tests, but what tests should people be advocating for on their, through their doctors to say, like, I need to check this, this, and this, or, some simple tips that you can give them that they can take away and go, okay, I'm going to wait until the next episode. And here we go.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a freebie called Your Next Best Steps. And it's 3 things you can do starting today to start supporting your hormones. They're mapped out inside of that. So I'll make sure that you guys have the link to link that up.
Excellent.
Okay. In terms of like advocating for yourself, understanding what's going on in your body, one of the very first things I encourage people to do is start tracking your symptoms with your cycle, regardless of what your symptoms are. Just say, okay, I ovulate, like literally just write down today's day 1 of my period, right? And then do a quick check-in every morning or every evening and think like, did anything happen today that may, that I care about? So let's say you've got migraines and you're really trying to figure out what's at the source of your migraines. Just write down on the paper, had a migraine. And that can be it. Like, you don't have to be the doctor here. Like, you don't have to know all the things, but start learning your body, because what you do have to be is the expert on your body. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to the doctor and saying like, hey, I occasionally have headaches, I don't really know what's going on, they're going to start treating the headache. Mm-hmm. If you go to the doctor and say, hey, I get a headache every single time on day 13 of my cycle and every single day on day 28 of my cycle, that's going to spark some thoughts of like, maybe this is related to her hormones. Maybe we need to check things like estrogen or thyroid or whatever. And a lot of times what I find is I see a lot of women whose traditional lab work looks normal, but they still have a lot of symptoms. And so the way our healthcare medical system is kind of set up now is, okay, well, if everything looks normal, come back to us when it doesn't look normal. So basically like wait till it gets bad enough that we have a reason to think something's going on. And so I like to say like, hey, let's look at something before that happens. And that's why I encourage people to have a healthcare team. So I love that Vera mentioned, like, I have an acupuncturist. I work with people as like a health consultant and a health coach and a holistic coach. And, having a couple chiropractors are a great person to bring on your team. Having people that have a couple different perspectives actually means that you're getting the most well-rounded, inclusive, holistic care for your body. So I think that's super important. I have a great story of a client that like was having issues with like vaginal irritation. And every single time she went to her doctor, the doctor was like, oh, here's a prescription. It's got to be like a bacterial infection in your vagina, basically. Over and over and over again. And I just said, hey, why don't you start tracking this and see what happens? We found out that every single time her estrogen levels were dipping, which we know our body changes levels throughout that cycle, throughout all of those phases, the issue was happening. The issue was coming up. And she asked her doctor, like, could this be an estrogen issue? The doctor was like, oh, no way. She went to a more holistic type provider. I can't remember if it was her chiropractor or someone else, but they were like, oh yeah, this is definitely what's happening. Helped her support her body through that estrogen transition, estrogen detox, boosting progesterone. And sure enough, symptom goes away. Doctor still thinks it's this infection, right? That she had prescribed a medication for like 6 times. And so I just say that to really encourage people, like you may have to do more than just ask your doctor for a test. And if something comes up and, it's this, and you do this to treat it and it's not getting better, advocate for yourself, get a second opinion, bring in someone that maybe has a different type of training, someone that has some training from natural medicine, someone that is a naturopath, like get multiple perspectives and focusing in on these things. If you think your hormones are out of balance, test to look at. So I don't tell people to just go get all your hormones tested because that can be really expensive. And a lot of times what we find in a test is exactly what I would tell you based off of your symptoms. So your symptoms tracked with your cycle can tell us major things. And there are a lot of things we can do to support your body from the foundations that don't require major interventions, major like issues. And those are going to be the first steps we tell you, even if you get your hormones checked and they're totally out of balance. So I say, why not hit those foundations first? And then if you're still having trouble, then let's dive deeper into what specific test you need. But I think it's great for everyone to, always know where your thyroid's at, how your thyroid is functioning, look for antibodies. You usually have to specifically ask for those from a doctor. They won't it's not a part of a standard thyroid test.
Yeah, that happened to me. Yep.
Yeah. You have to look for reverse T3 and, antibodies and TSH alone isn't a great indicator, especially if you're, doing some research and figuring out, I really think my thyroid is a problem. And that kind of brings me to my last point of follow your gut and your intuition. We do this for our kids all the time. If we go somewhere and somebody tells us oh, this is what's wrong with your kid. And in your gut, no, that's not it. You're going to fight and you're going to find someone and you're going to ask questions and you're going to find the research articles and you're not settling with oh, okay, yeah, my kid's just broken. But we do that so much as women in our own bodies, right? We think it's just me. It's because I don't eat good enough. But is it really? And most of the time it's not. Our bodies are so resilient. Even if you don't have a perfect diet, that is not always what your health problems are coming back to. And as women, especially, it's so loud what our bodies should look like that we attribute our weight and our diet to 90% of problems that have nothing to do with our weight and our diet. So yeah, advocate, follow your intuition, follow that gut feeling, and don't settle for this is just how I am. This is just how I was born. This is just the problem my mom had too.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's awesome. And someone has told me that before, why aren't you as nice to yourself as you are to your kid? And it is, we're so hard, especially, I think women, especially, we're so hard on ourselves. It's just because we're constantly, like you said, we're getting thrown all these judgments, through the media and friends and family. And, we just feel like we're supposed to be whatever. And like you said, if we're not that golden whatever it is, then it's just kind of all right, well, whatever, I can never be that anyway.
Well, I think it's also a lot of information overload too, because we have everybody's an expert on something, right? And it's your friend, this friend had success here, this friend had success there, the internet's saying this, books are saying this, and you're just what is right? I don't know. I give up. I
can't do it anymore. Give me some jujubes.
I would just be in this forever.
That's so true.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Heather, for being here. And we definitely want to have you on again because there's so much more we can talk about.
Yes.
But how,
this was so great.
How do people find you? Where are you? What's your website and your email and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, so you can find me. Instagram is where I hang out the most. It is at Dr. Heather Rhodes. Email is hello@drheatherrhodes.com. And then if you go to Instagram, you'll find a link to sign up for my email list and those freebies. Yeah, that's going to be the best place to hang out. And then my website is linked on that Instagram bio as well, but it's just www.drheatherrhodes.com.
Okay. And it's Rhodes, HRRHODES, right?
Yes.
Not like the thing you drive on.
Yeah, not something you drive on, not the flower. People always think I say rose, and I'm like, no, Rhodes.
Rhodes. Yeah. Awesome. And then of course for us, you find us at I Can't Mom Today podcast at gmail.com, and then I Can't Mom Today podcast.com and Instagram and Facebook and all that fun stuff.
Yay.
Until next time.
Again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.